Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Gary Boomer. Hi, Gary. Thank you for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing.
Hi, John.
So Gary is the founder of Boomer Consulting, and he specializes in a lot of different areas, innovation and growth. And as we lead into the topic today around how to think about the growth of your firm, I think we have a great topic for Gary to expand on for us. Now, the title of this episode is How to Think About the Growth of Your Firm. Gary, do you want to highlight why it's important, as we start our conversation here, for firms to kind of think about their thinking and really take that word seriously?
Sure, John. I was inspired earlier in my career. I had the privilege, along with 3 or 4 other CPAs, to work with IBM as they provided programs to the accounting profession and the legal industry, or legal profession, I should say, as well. And they always had the sign, it said think. And if you think about that, you probably have heard of ThinkPads, Think Center, and even their Think Conference. Those became trademarks of IBM. So I was intrigued by that, of what it really meant. So in that day, it wasn't so easy to go back and do the research, but I did some research. In the early 1900s, Tom Watson, the former chair and the one that really got a lot of credit for IBM, worked for NCR in their sales group. And he put the sign up that said think. And he took that from NCR, or I should say, brought it with him to IBM. And he was questioned about it, and people wanted a whole lot of thought behind it. And he said, we don't think enough, all of us, before we act. And if you want to grow, you really need to think. But he said, I'm not trying to write a logic course on this. I'm just trying to get the human being to think and think about their decisions, think about anything that's important to them. And so that always impressed me. But it was later on in my career then when we came up with the tagline, think, plan, and grow. And I just have to tell you that there's a reason behind that too, even though it's subtle. And most accountants get that wrong. They want to grow, plan, and think. And it's think, plan, and grow. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking and planning about our own accounting firms. We spend an awful lot of time thinking and doing and charging hours for our clients. So that's kind of the background of this, and we'll get into it a little bit more about the type of thinking that firms really need to do.
So Gary, before we get into that, of the types of thinking firms need to be doing, expand on a little bit why you think our profession historically has not taken the time or prioritized the time to think.
Well, I think we are a service profession, and many of us got into the profession to solve problems and serve others. So that's the main priority. And as firms grow, they tend to spend more on management and operations of the firm. Oftentimes they take one of their very best partners and put them into the role of managing partners, and they develop administration to go along with that. But I still don't think we spend enough time in planning or just thinking and visioning of what it is we want in the future, rather than just taking what's dealt to us in the real world.
Yep, that's great. So Gary, you touched on, or you mentioned, the types of thinking firms should be doing. So what advice do you have for firms? What's your recommendations for the types of thinking they should be prioritizing?
Well, in today's rapidly moving world, all everyone talks about right now is innovation, change, and how the profession is transforming. Well, I couldn't agree more that the profession must transform in order to sustain success and remain, and I'm going to use a different term than I normally do, and that's relevant. We are losing some of our relevance in the service lines that we do, and therefore it's very important to think and design the type of firm that we want in the future. If I hear people complain in our profession, it's about the long hours and all the work they have to do in a compressed time period. So why don't we try to just think about how we might change that with our service lines, maybe the number of tax clients we have, and we could design a firm that is much more profitable, more enjoyable for the people to work in. And it just takes some time and sitting down and thinking. Now, you're not going to change everything, but we'll talk here in a little bit about how you solve big problems in accounting firms.
So I think that's really great, Gary. And I speak with a lot of firms, and one, especially partners that are looking to grow maybe in new ways individually, the type of work that they're doing and delivering to their clients, or if they are leading the firm's growth. And one thing they always struggle with is to find time, right? Find time to sit and think, strategically about their firm or even their clients' problems. So, how should they make that a priority to solve those big problems you just alluded to?
Well, I think it sounds simple, but it's more difficult. Uh, the first thing they need to do is come up with a shared vision. What does the firm really want to be, do, have, experience, and create in the next 3 years? And I've shortened that from my career, or during my career, in that it used to be people would do 10, 20-year plans. Well, today, with the changes in technology and the global economy, I think you've got to look forward no more than 3 years. Now, you can look out for the big picture, but the specifics of that plan are going to be over the next 1 to 3 years. Now, once you have the vision, then you develop the plan. And we're talking about growth here, so I'm going to limit that a little bit in that, where do you really want to grow? And do you want more clients that are just like the clients you have? And I contend in the majority of firms, the answer is no. So when you're thinking, the best way to solve the problem is think exponential rather than incremental. And most of us have been trained to think we're going to grow our firm 10%. And in the last few years, that's been pretty good organically. But the question you should ask yourself, and in this world of all kinds of data, all kinds of information, it's what questions you can ask and use that data to help you. So the question is, what do we want to look like and be able to do in 3 years? And then how are we going to do it? But let's think exponentially. What if we were, and I hate to use the term 10 times as large, but the better question is, what if we could provide 10x value to our existing clients? And the first thing people will say is, well, some of them are just 1040 clients. Well, what should we do with those 1040 clients? Are they critical to us in the future and our vision? And if not, then I think you need to make some decisions on how you may need to cull the herd. But when you think 10x, how can we improve the lifestyle for our partners and our people 10x and still sustain the income? then the answers come easier. But if you think, how are we going to grow 10% and make dramatic changes? That just doesn't work. And I've often asked them to, if it's a $10 million firm, what would you do if you were a $100 million firm? And it's easy to answer the question, what the firm should do. More difficult to answer the question, what I would do as a partner, other than take more vacation, which may not be bad either. So this is just spending time thinking or playing what if.
Yeah, and I really love those types of exercises, Gary. And one I've heard you mention over the years, it's just a question you've posed in different scenarios, is what if your firm did all the compliance work for your clients for free? Let's just do a thought exercise. What if all the compliance work you were doing for clients were free? How would you still continue to grow and add revenue and provide value to those clients if all the compliance work you were doing was free? Now, that question is meant to maybe snap people into a thought process to think exponentially. It's not to minimize the value of compliance work, because compliance work is extremely valuable. But I think it helps break our brain a little bit to say, yeah, what would we do in that instance? And most likely, most of the answers you come up to that question are things you should be doing today anyways. So I love that you've thrown that out there over the years. And I know there are several of those types of thought exercises and those types of questions that really get people to think differently. Any other advice or thoughts, Gary, for our listeners on how to think about their thinking?
Well, I liked your reminding me of that question. I normally have termed it a little bit different than you had it, in that you made it extremely hard. I said, what if all that compliance work were to go away? How would you propose to your clients that you could add value to them to build your firm back up to where it was and grow? And that is not an easy question either. But normally when I ask the firm, do you want to be 10 times larger? There will be, the first partner will say, I don't want to be 10 times larger. I want to be 10 times more profitable. And then when I ask them, how are you going to grow and do that? Then they start talking about merger. And the thinking comes in when they decide as a firm, and there's often differences of opinion, should we merge up into a larger firm, or should we create and design the infrastructure and develop the people that it's going to take for us to be a firm that can merge other firms into us or grow organically? And that's when the thinking really starts, because you have to come up with strategy. But that's a major thought process today we see in many firms.
Yep. So Gary, I know you're really tuned in and really invest a lot in reading and getting access to information outside of the accounting profession. So as you think about kind of this more exponential thinking, or how to think about your thinking, what are you seeing happening outside the accounting profession related to this topic that maybe the accounting profession should learn from?
Well, I just have a great example that I learned day before yesterday. I've been fortunate this past week to be on phone calls with Peter Diamandis and also with Elon Musk. And you know, Elon he's quite the thinker, and he's big into space, as is Peter Diamandis. And Elon says the hardest thing for people to do is kill a project when that project won't meet their vision or no longer meets their vision. And I got to thinking about, that's really smart. But It is hard to do. And the example that Peter and Elon talked about were the Falcon 9 rocket. That rocket will not get them to Mars. So he now has a new Starship, and they're moving that operation to Texas out of California, which is a whole nother story. But you see how he has changed his operations in order to meet his vision. And I think that's why visioning is so important today, and have your people on the same page, because you do have to make some tough decisions with existing services, existing clients, as to whether what got you to this point will get you to the next level. And I say it's often the case that it will not, without making some changes.
Yep. Nope, that's great. So, Gary, as we finish out our conversation here on this topic, what recommendations or next steps, for our listeners? You may have probably spurred some thinking in our listeners today. If you could leave them with one piece of advice or one next step they could take to move forward in this area, what would you say?
Well, I would say, even if they're not planning, and most will not plan to be a 10X organization, most would be happy with 10 to 20% growth, and then worry about how they're going to service the clients. I would say the one takeaway is, ask yourself the question, how are we going to create 10X value for that client? And the rest of the questions will fall into place. But even if you're 10 or 20% growth, you're going to have to answer these questions anyway. So the takeaway is, think like you're 10 times larger. Don't think like you were 10 years ago, because that old line thinking is going to really keep you from sustaining success and being future ready.
I like it. Thank you, Gary. And thank you again for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing. For our listeners, if you like this conversation and these types of topics, please subscribe to the Boomer Briefing podcast. The subscription link is in the description. And we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. So please stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks so much.